Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm going to be reading chapter 3 of Deepest Despair. And if my words are hard to understand, I am sorry. It's currently 2 at night. And when I recorded this earlier, the sound wasn't working. So I have to reread this. So I'm a little more tired than usual. But I hope you guys enjoy. Chapter 3. Izuku has left his house over 48 hours. He skipped 2 days of school, and he barely even feels like moving out of his bed. For the past 2 days, Izuku had been refusing to attend school to All Might. Instead, he simply laid curled in a tiny ball in his nest of pillows and blankets, trying to think positive. What about what had happened on Tuesday? But what was positive about that day? Sure, Inko did end up being placed in the top hospital in Tokyo, but that was only because All Might was there. And sure, she was still alive, but she's in critical conditions. Not to mention, Izuku's father didn't come home for the past days. He assumed that could be a plus, but how would that be a plus when all Izuku wanted to do is kick the shit out of him? Hell, if Izuku was really thinking hard about positive acts, then sure, his friends had texted him about 1,000 times, which was sweet, but Izuku really wasn't in the mood to talk to anyone. So of course, Izuku would stay cooped up in his room for another day, probably get dragged by his feet out of his house by Uraraka, but still, Izuku would surely stay home one more day. You have to go to school today, young Midoriya. You can't skip school. I understand you're in pain, but all of this, maybe school could get your mind off of things for a little. Your friends have been asking a lot about you. They're worried. If you don't come to school today, then I'm not sure Aizawa will be very pleased as well. Well, shit. Izuku can absolutely not risk losing his place in 2A. This was one of the only things that kept Izuku sane. At this point, he couldn't lose that. Seems like Izuku's going to be coming to school today. Much to his displeasure, Izuku groaned as he felt the morning sunrise hit his closed eyes. Peeling open his right eye, he glanced aside at his clock, sighing as he read the much too early time that was bold in red, 5:28. No matter how much Izuku hoped to go back to sleep, he knew he couldn't, not with his nerves. His mind is surely going to find something to go on a tangent about and scare little old Izuku wide open before the clock could even hit 6 o'clock yet. So with his body screaming and protesting, he carefully slid himself out of his tangled and bloody bed sheets. Bloody? Izuku had been cutting. It's been his way of releasing for over a year, and he had found himself doing it before he could even comprehend it. He glared at the one of the larger red patches and groaned in disgust. He was weak, cutting. It was weak that his imitated reaction to emotional pain is physical. And it was disgusting. He had friends at school that asked him on a daily basis if he was okay. They were the most sympathetic, kind, and caring emotions on their faces as they wore the most sympathetic, kind and caring emotions on their face as they tried to look Izuku in the eye and get any type of answers from him. He had people who made it very aware that he had people who made it very aware that he had people who cared for him, that were there for him, but his mind never truly comprehended that. For some idiotic reason, his brain decided it didn't give a flying fuck that he had people who cared. Instead, he continued to pump worse and worse thoughts into Izuku, and made him truly believe that no one was there. He had been used to a young age to not have anyone to talk to. Sure, he could always talk to his mother, but she always had her own things to deal with. Have it be taxes, dribbling 2 jobs, and sending Izuku to school. She always seemed to be too drained and too tired for Izuku to talk. Even from the age of 4, Izuku knew his mother wasn't in the best emotional state, and he never wanted to make it worse. School was a living hell for him, so of course he couldn't find any comfort in the people there. The group of young boys that simply found it absolutely hilarious to beat Izuku's confidence and hope down to the dirt, spitting on his comfort and personality just for good measures. Those boys made it clear to everyone that Izuku was absolutely unwanted waste of air. He tried his best to pass it as a joke, but not take too much time to dwell on their bickering. But the things they said hit Izuku hard, and the reason was because the person who knew more than anyone about Izuku was leading the group. The boy knew exactly what to say and what to poke at to cause his mood to drop and his eyes to spring to life with tears. Kosuke Bakugo, his full name alien-like on Izuku's tongue. Kachan was the only thing that he had ever called the blonde. There had been times where he called him Bakuchan, but that only lasted a day before he began using his nickname. They had known each other since the age of 2, and at that time the two of them had been inseparable. Kosuke knew everything about Izuku and Kosuke knew everything about Izuku, and same went the other way around. He knew Izuku's emotional problems, his worry about his mother, and even some of Izuku's views in life. He used to be someone that Izuku could talk to, someone who understood him and truly cared for him, but that didn't last long. As the ripe age of 4, Kosuke began developing his quirk, and strongly praised by his peers, and by the age of 8 he snapped. Suddenly the Kachan Izuku had grown up with seemed foreign to him. He began being rude, obnoxious, foul-mouthed, even more than he was a child, and dishonest, sometimes even abusive. He would beat his fears and hate into Izuku, and Izuku alone. But Izuku wasn't blind. He saw the face that the boy wore when he would use his quirk against the smaller teen. It was one of the most painful and subtle horror. He knew Kosuke better than anyone, well, besides his mom, but almost everyone. He knew that something was wrong with him, something was bothering Kosuke, and his imitated response was to beat Izuku down with things. Izuku knew he had told Kosuke about as kids his fears of not being a good soulmate, or worse, not finding his soulmate. His father, whom he hadn't met at this time, and his quirkless self. His words were beaten into him, ingrained in his memory, but Izuku never blamed Kosuke. No matter what, Koski was someone Izuku had trusted from a young age. Even if the boy was different, hostile, and a jerk, Izuku could still see his childhood friend in his eyes, his red golden orbs that swam with so many emotions that people never really understood what he was feeling, so they usually based it on the facial expressions, which was almost always a scowl, so of course they thought he was always just mad, but Izuku knew there was more to that look. Jerking his head out of his thought process and quickly pushed himself all the way out of his bed. He winced as his arms moved, and more of the stinging sensation came back to him. He laced his fingers in front of his eyes before harshly palming his closed eyelids. Removing his hands, he grimaced as he glanced around his room, noticing it was probably the only room in his house that didn't have any beer bottles in it. He groaned, shaking his head, beginning shuffling towards the bathroom. His thighs ached from the strain of having weight put on them after not standing in almost a full day. Izuku stepped onto the freezing cold bathroom tiles and immediately crouched down and grabbed his first aid kit as if he was a broken robot. He wrapped both of his arms without blinking and placed the box back. The short teen snapped his gaze to the mirror and examined his Queen, groaning as he sees the disheveled freckled face stare back at him. Although you should love yourself. You are adorable. Don't worry about what other people say. Don't look down on your appreciations. Embrace who you are. Everyone is beautiful in the inside, and the what's inside is what matters came to Izuku's mind. All the time his mother had tried to raise his confidence, all the time Uraka has complimented him, and the times he had heard people attempt to make a person happy about how they look. What bullshit. Frowning at his reflection, he allowed his head to hang down, staring bullets into his sink. He could do this. It's just school. For crying out loud, he had been doing this his whole life. It isn't some type of new concept. All of a sudden, something devastating happened in his life, and he can't even face his peers. It's not like he hadn't gone through pain before. Why was he having problems now? What happened to smiley, charismatic boy that he used to be? Oh, what a simple question. Hisashi Midoriya happened. Izuku spat, his voice seething. He dug around the cabinet and took out his toothbrush, and decided he might as well get this day over with. Oh wait, he had a whole weekend to get through too. Ugh, Izuku groaned, continuing with his morning routine. Izuku readjusted his tie, trying to at least make it look decent. It's not like Izuku wasn't a fan of his school uniform. It's just that he hated ties. He could never figure out how to correctly get the god-forsaken piece of fabric to lace together, how it was supposed to. Once he deemed himself presentable enough for school, he left silently, slipping past the door as if his father was going to jump out of nowhere and slit his throat. Almost immediately after he began his trek to school, his mind began to wonder about something that Izuku may think about a little too much: soulmates. Sure, Izuku may be terrified to have one, but who wouldn't at least try and hold on to the hope that someone would be able to pull you out of the deep black hole that you had fallen in? The idea of someone being out there helped Izuku, comfort him, be there for him, and when he needed them the most. Oh God, did Izuku wish that people say what people said was true. He wished that it was true, that someone would walk into your life and make all the pain go away, making him feel better. That's all he asked for, but he knew it couldn't happen. It just seemed so unlikely. It was like fiction. The stories people told were like fiction. Everything went too smoothly for it to be realistic. He wished real life was like fiction. Izuku was haunted with the idea that his soulmate, the person fated chosen for him, was going to wake up the day after their birthday and look down to see the most stunning art clinging to their arm. The fact that he knew that they would be bearing his own pain with him, bearing a mark that showed it too. He felt terrible for the person who is going to, or already is feeling his pain, already every hit, every kick, every ball of smothering fire to the face, every scrape. Oh God, he felt horrible. Soulmates are a blessing, but a curse. But there was also a possibility that Zuko's soulmate didn't care about soulmates. Maybe they had already found someone, didn't care about the mark on their arm, and simply wanted to be with the person they knew they loved unconditionally. What if his soulmate doesn't go looking for him? What if he's stuck like this, living in this lie, this shit show? Izuku took a large gulp of air, and the cold temperature leaving a sting sensation at the back of his throat, trying his best to push through to the thought to the back of his mind. He continued on. He decided that he didn't want to have an episode in public again this month. A few minutes later, Izuku was walking up to the dramatically sized steps and entered through one of the 3 massive doors at the front of UA. It was around 6:40 at least this point, so not many people were walking around in the halls. People who came at this time in the morning usually either go straight to their classrooms, the library, and a selected few went to the computer room. Izuku decided to just head to the classroom and stay there for the remaining 20 minutes until school starts, and he hesitantly opened the door to 2A, relishing that the large door hadn't squeaked. He slipped past the doorway and quickly headed to a seat right behind the blonde that just so happened to already be there. Izuku could feel prying eyes in the classroom immediately dropped to him. He felt the stares at the back of his neck, and he dropped his face. Izuku tried to ignore the stares, but he hated attention. That was hell. This is hell. Oh, Midoriya. Oh, Midoriya. Glad to see you're alive. Izuku snapped his head up, looking to his right to see Todoroki calmly sitting in his desk, a pencil twiddling between his fingers. Momo sat next to him, chatting happily with him. Izuku nodded in understanding, placing his head in his hands. He could infer that Tokiyami and Sue were here as well. He faintly heard their whispers from their corner of the classroom, but the most dominant was the blonde in front of him. That stare, it was like hot coal, and it was pointing straight at the greenette, causing Izuku's face to heat up. Izuku had a sudden random rushing thought that came from the back of his mind to gain its presence. What if the soulmate was in his class? It was likely. It wasn't odd to hear about people having their soulmate in a couple classes in high school. However, since 2A did all their classes together, it lowered the chance of Izuku's soulmate being in his class. What if they are here right now? His mind supplied cheekily, and Izuku groaned. Yeah, sure, they would end up being any of these. Yeah, sure, if they would. Sure. Like they would end up being any of these people. He highly doubted he had met his soulmate yet, and Izuku was in no rush to find out. Sure, he wanted to find his soulmate, but going hunting for them seemed a little much. Soulmates are literally tied at fate. If they're real, they will meet then you'll meet them, no matter what. It was scary to think that such a big part of your life was already planned out for you. Of course, things could always not go as planned, but the path to the end can change. This is what Izuku had been told from the early age, and he still hoped it was true. Knowing Izuku would probably mess up his chance with a soulmate, and he would, when he learned who they are, will probably make the person hate him. Izuku groaned again, wincing as he accidentally moved his arm too fast. "Hey, shit stain, you dying?" Koski slowly said from in front of Izuku. The greenette lightly tipped his head up, glancing at Koski's calmly slouched broad shoulders. Izuku felt a strange ting at the tone of his chosen, but his quickly pushed it to this. Izuku felt a strange ting to the tone he chosen, but he quickly pushed it to the side like he had so many times before. No, it seems more like no. It seems more like a question than a response. Koski sighed in a distance, clicking his tongue against the teeth before saying anything again. He was still staring holes into Izuku. When Izuku was about to place his hands back down in his arms, he noticed noticed the reason why Koski was mainly staring at him. His sleeves had slipped down, revealing the slowly growing red patch on his bandages. Izuku breathed, hitched as he pulled his sleeve back down. Koski's eyes darkened with something Izuku could only decipher as anger, but it didn't exactly look like anger. So what could it be? Oh Lord, was Izuku really getting this bad at reading Koski's emotions? He used to be the only one who could do that, but that seems to have changed. Izuku's mood dropped even more. Sadness leaked more into his eyes as he glanced around. Koski refused to meet his eyes. Sadness leaked into his eyes as he glanced around. Koski refused to meet his eyes. Glancing around, Koski refusing to meet his eyes. "Where are you hiding, nerd?" he whispered, scooting his chair closer towards Izuku's desk. His breathing hitched again and shook his head, moving his arms so they rested under the table. Nothing," he said weakly, his throat aching from the past nights of screaming. Koski slowly lifted himself out of the chair. His movement seemed very hesitant, and like how Izuku's mind loved to do, it supplied him with a deep bone realization. Koski looked scared. Izuku blinked rapidly in confusion. Koski Bakugo? Scared? That's bullshit. Sure, Izuku knew he has been scared before, but the boy is extremely good at hiding his emotions, and Izuku knows it. He's seen it 1,000 times before, when he had just the small glint of horror past his eyes. It was only something you could notice if you spent your whole life staring at those scarlet eyes. Nothing else showed his emotion. He played it off like he was some type of unkillable god with no emotions than anger and win. But Koski isn't bad. He isn't that arrogant. Now, without even glancing at his eyes, Izuku could tell that he was scared, but by his hesitant steps, his quietly tone, even the lack of words that Blonde was spewing out of his mouth was enough for Izuku to tell something wasn't right. Izuku heard a few more classmates enter the classroom, their voices greetings blurred. He was able to peel his eyes away from Koski's figure and instead peer at the clock just for a moment. 6:55. Class started soon. Of course people were coming in now. His breathing hitched as he felt a warm hand come in contact with his sleeve. His eyes snapped to the blonde, who was now standing straight in front of him, slightly taking his wrist in, surprisingly gripping gentle grip. Wait, Izuku protested as he felt Koski begin peeling his sleeve. He heard Koski lightly mutter something to himself, but for the life of him, Izuku could not decipher it. However, right before Koski was seemingly going to pull down his sleeve and uncover his already stained red wrap, the intercom turned on. Beep! Izuku Midoriya, please report to All Might's office as soon as possible. He was saved. Or was he?